Tonight we welcome guests from the past whom our students have researched over the year. They will present their life stories. They will discuss their ideas with each other. And at the end, near the end, we'll open it for audience questions. A couple of heads up that are also in the program. One is, the students have written and researched papers on these characters. They've written and drawn the pictures in the programs and written the biographies and the questions and answers. They worked to put together a conversation as best they can based on what they understand the characters to have thought and believed. Also, as it says in the program, I'll just read this bit for you. As our historical guests tell their life stories and discuss their views, they will express opinions meant to be those of the characters represented. The views expressed are not necessarily, and in some cases are definitely not, those of the students portraying them or of Hillside. In addition, our students are dedicated to accurately portraying characters and their perspectives while conducting their research and presentations in a manner that promotes inclusivity and respect, and refraining from cultural appropriation. They are not pretending that they can be these people, but they're doing their best to represent them. Also note, as I already did, that the sketches, the writings are all theirs. So we will start with their life stories, one after another in chronological order. We will then have a break to go to the toilet and get your dinner, and then come back and eat while they have a conversation. I ask your help that you let them go first during the break, and so that they can get fed. There will be a second shorter break in the middle of the conversation. At the end, as I said, we'll open it for audience questions. Enjoy.
Greetings, mateys. I am Edward Peach, better known as Blackbeard, the terror of the seas. I was born about 1680 in England. As a young man, I was a privateer, serving on a boat during Queen Anne's War, one of the many fights between European empires over North American lands. Back in my day, being a privateer was better than being a Marine. Privateers were more honorable because we were seen as honorable because we helped our country in wars. But we were also able to keep enemies loose from the French and Spanish. But all good things have to come to an end, and the war ended. However, Lady Luck was on my side, and this moment was part of the golden age of piracy. The golden age of piracy was a time when the New World had a loot to plunder, but not too much protection. Britain and other European powers pillaged the New World for wealth and power. They passed laws against smuggling, but they didn't have the means to enforce them, since they were always fighting each other. This neglect gave opportunities to both colonists and to both colonists and other people to smuggle and do that. Since I was in need of work at the time, I became a pirate. I wasn't captain until I formed my own crew. My crew and I engaged in many battles and endeavors. Stories were told about our infamous escapades. I was not married to just one woman, but I had over 10 wives all across the Caribbean. I was known for my terrible appearance and my burning beard. As I intended, I became so feared that the people would surrender without a fight. Why should I bother fighting if I could use fear as a weapon? I believe my greatest feat was to block all of the port of Charleston without lifting a finger. I prevented ships from coming in or out of the harbor. I captured about 10 of them, taking their sailors, passengers, and prisoners as hostages and demanding medicine for my crew. I sent a message to the city leaders and threatened to murder my prisoners and send their heads back to the city if they did not meet my requirements. Of course, they were afraid of my image, so they turned over the medicine. In return, I released the prisoners. After this event, I was dubbed public enemy #1 in the New World. There was a price for my head and people were hunting me. Spotswood, the governor of Virginia, sent Robert Maynard with a couple of sloops to chase me down on November 22nd, 1718. They surprised me near Ocracoke Island. We had a ferocious fight with grenades, pistols, cutlasses, during which my ship, the Adventure, ran aground. While dueling with Maynard, I was killed by several of his men, after which my men surrendered. The king's men threw my body in the inlet and put my head on a pole near the chief stake, to be a warning to other pirates. I met my demise in battle but my fearsome reputation lived on.
Sharpshooter extraordinaire. I was born in Ohio on August 13, 1860, as Phoebe Ann Moses. My father showed me how to shoot, and I eventually entered a shooting contest against a professional named Frank Butler. Frank had been shooting much longer than I had, but I won the contest and we were married a year later. Frank and I starred in an act we called Butler and Oak Tree. During the day we performed in shooting expeditions and at night at vaudeville theaters, but we eventually left LA. For 2 years, we worked with the Sells brothers in their circus. Frank recognized my talent and decided to become my manager instead of performing alongside me. In 1884, we left the Sells brothers and decided to pursue other employment. Butler and I became members of Buffalo Bill's show in 1885. But Bill had turned us away before we joined the Wild West show. Bill's partner, Nate Salisbury, had seen me shoot, however, and he hired me on the spot. In me, he saw more than a spectacular sharpshooter. He saw the answer to one of the Wild West's biggest problems. Up until me, the Wild West had been all male performance, and it was not considered a family event. But I changed that. It then became a show for all people. I performed in front of enormous crowds and royalty, including Queen Victoria, King Umberto of Italy, and Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany. After 2 years of performing with the Wild West, Frank and I left the show, although Buffalo Bill asked me to join the Wild West one last time for his final tour. I believe strongly in women's rights and that women are equal to men. I thought all women should be able to fire a rifle for self-defense, and during World War I, I offered to train a regiment of women sharpshooters, but my offer was rejected. In 1901, Frank and I were in a horrible train wreck with the Wild West show, and I was badly hurt. My hands and back were particularly damaged, and I was in recovery from this, but eventually went back to performing. I was also the victim of a horrible car crash in Florida in 1922, from which I never fully recovered, and had to wear a brace for the rest of my life. I died on November 3rd, 1926, from pernicious anemia, but now there's new evidence that says it may have been lead poisoning from handling live ammunition for years. What I've learned, and my advice to you is, aim high at the mark and you will hit it. No, not the first time, not the second time, and maybe not the third, but keep shooting, and finally you will hit the bullseye of success.
Good evening, fellow Americans. My name is Ronald Reagan. I was an American actor and politician, most notably the 40th President of the United States, presiding over 2 sequential terms starting in 1980. I started in radio broadcasting in Chicago in 1932, before entering in a 7-year contract with Warner Brothers in 1936. My film career was lackluster, but what really decided the course of my life career was World War II. I was unable to serve an active service, and so I worked as a transport officer before being transferred to the Union Artillery. members were lost in the war, won me the election over peace-focused politicians, because there can be no real peace while one American is dying in some place in the world for the rest of us. I focused on anti-union work, tax revision, divorce and abortion rights, and legislation to curb the California chapter of the Black Panther Party. My presidency followed similarly, with major deregulation of economic regulation and an increase of military funding. My victory in the election was a grocery list of promises I made to solve the nation's growing restlessness with liberal politics and war. I promised to get government off our backs, out of our pockets, and up to the standards of decency and excellency envisioned by the Founding Fathers. My failed reaction to the HIV/AIDS crisis, involvement in the war on drugs, and reduction of welfare programs have made me one of the most infamous presidents in recent history with liberals. But my economic approaches influence and inspire many conservative politicians to this day. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Lucy Desiree Ball, professional comedian, actor, and CEO of my own Hollywood production company. I was born August 6, 1911, and lived in Jamestown, New York. My beginnings were on the rougher side, losing my father to typhoid fever when I was 4 years old. My mother then went to California to live with her aunt, and I was left with my grandparents. We didn't have much money, and I moved around a lot. I discovered my love for comedy when my grandfather took me to vaudeville shows every Sunday, never missing a single one. I carried these shows with me for the rest of my career, and they inspired me. When I was 15 or 16, I became a showgirl. That didn't last long, as I was deemed a nothing. So I became a model and created a new identity for myself as Diane Belmont, eventually earning the name Toon Gun. I was given an opportunity to model in California, since one of the girls who was originally supposed to go couldn't. I would have never made it if I had tried out for it. I was sent to Hollywood and was only supposed to be there for 6 weeks, but stayed for 6 months. I loved Hollywood so much that I never went back to New York. I didn't know what direction my career was shifting, but I wanted to find my place and be a part of something. I worked all day and night to make this happen. I eventually found my home at the RKO company. They were very good to me, and they finally asked me what I wanted to do. Since it was a male-dominated industry, I had to be really good as a woman. My big break was on a radio show. I met my ex-husband, Desi Arnaz, and we married a few months later. Desi went on tours, and he was also drafted in the Army, so I didn't see much of him during that time. After we had been married for years, the producers wanted to adapt the radio show into a television show that came to be called I Love Lucy. But they didn't want Desi as a husband because he was Cuban, and they wanted an all-American family. However, we wanted to work together. We were in love, and I didn't want any other man than him on the show to be my husband. We did it, and the audience loved us. It was hard to be in the spotlight when you were trying to focus on your family and starting one. Desi and I had tried many times. When I finally did get pregnant, I didn't even know until it was posted all over the news. I ended up losing that baby, and that was pretty devastating for Desi and I. We did eventually have 2 children together, and I was still working when I was pregnant. I was the first woman shown pregnant on television. So we also invented the rerun model while I was recovering after giving birth. After the show ended, Desi and I went on tour for a year and created our own production company called Desi Lou. During this time, I noticed our relationship was slipping, so we went to marriage counseling. After one final trip as a family, I decided to file for a divorce. We worked one last time together and then parted ways. He left the Desi Lou company, selling his half to me, and I became the boss. I still made it back to the studios, creating a sequel to the I Love Lucy show called The Lucy Show, about 2 single mothers raising their kids together and their friendship. In 1967, I sold Desilu Productions to Paramount Pictures and established my own production company, Lucille Ball Productions, in 1968. I retired in 1974, but my production company was still going strong. The company wanted me to make a final Lucy show called Life with Lucy, but it was canceled in late 1986, and the company finally closed. I spent my last years with my dogs and my second husband, Gary Morton.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Muddy Waters. I'm known as a musician, an entertainer, and a performer. My life starts on April 4th, 1930, and I was called Tony Morganfield. I was raised and taught manners by my grandmother. Early in my life, my mom died of cancer. It took hard work to get past that, but knowing that my grandma loved me, she was pushing me forward. It never felt like there was a war in the world with her. Life wasn't too tricky or something, though poverty was one thing. Many times I'd be caught messing over by a creek. Thinking back on it, that's how I got my name, Muddy Waters. Life kept this nice way of flow, but when I heard music with beats and the hum of that voice, life became a new one. I found music while exploring by the church. The church was where I spent most of my time. It kept playing these tunes, which just felt just right hearing them. Looking back on it, I loved it, especially the tunes from the Son House, Robert Johnson, and Big Bill Broomfield. I loved them. From that point, music became a part of my life. Growing up, I taught myself the harmonica, which came me from my youth sometimes. Every time I listened and practiced through those blues, I felt more in love with them than I did the day before. At the time of my 17th birthday, I got myself a teacher and learned the guitar. During my adulthood, I ran this little cabin, which I called the Duke House. I played my heart out there with other bands and even had the stage to myself. Time came to where I had to leave for Chicago from Mississippi. I was a southern man in a city, trying to be a city man. The life of a musician didn't sit off right away though, so I worked at a factory though. Played at nightclubs whenever I saw a chance. Eventually, my tunes hit the ears. I made some masterpieces which people had slang from. I held them, I feel like going home and I can't be satisfied. Going forward, I got myself an electric guitar so I could reach the people clearer, which sang like wind from a soaring cliff. I lived the stage with dramatic shouts, swoops, and Galesto songs. I made myself 13 albums and a proud 62 songs. Though I love the hums and rhythms, I think I love people who listen to my music even more.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Richard Flyman, physicist and teacher. I was born in Far Rockaway, New York in 1918. My father, Melville Feynman, was originally from Belarus. I was curious at a young age. My father and I would often talk about how things work in the world. I received my undergraduate degree from MIT after being refused by Columbia because of the Jewish quota, an anti-Semitic system that limited the number of Jewish students in a school. While at MIT, Manuel Valarti and I published 2 papers about the scattering of cosmic rays. I earned my PhD in physics at Princeton University and almost immediately started working for a ballistics department in the Army. Since my family was Jewish, I went to synagogue when I was young, but as an adult, I considered myself an atheist. I was close with my younger sister, Joan. She was often told that women cannot be scientists, but I encouraged her to keep learning. She eventually gained a PhD in astronomy. While at Los Alamos, I learned how to crack safes, which came in handy if you needed something from somebody who was gone, or just for entertainment. But it got me in trouble with security when I demonstrated to the leading colonel at Los Alamos that I could crack a safe in about 5 minutes. I first married Arlene Greenbaum. We had met in high school, and she tried very hard to reform my behavior, as I tended to not care much for other people's opinions. Arlene fell sick with tuberculosis before we married, while I was working at Los Alamos, but was soon diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease. She died in 1945. I briefly married Mary Lou, but we soon divorced. I married a third time to Gwyneth Howard. We had a good relationship, and we're still married when I died. We had 2 children, Carl and Michelle. I worked at Caltech for many years. I was diagnosed with lymphoma cancer in 1978. After 2 surgeries and a crushed kidney, I died in February 1988 at age 69.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I worked to become a famous lawyer and eventually a Supreme Court justice. But I began in a middle-class family in Brooklyn. Just me, my mother, and my father. My sister had died a few years before I was born. We were a close family and I excelled at school. Despite growing up during World War II as a Jewish person, before my graduation, my mother died. Luckily, she lived long enough to witness my acceptance into Harvard. I studied hard, and in my second year, I met Marty Ginsburg. We fell in love and eventually married. Before I could start law school, however, Marty was drafted. We lived on base and had a little girl. Then we moved back and continued at Harvard Law School. During my second year, Marty's third, he was diagnosed with cancer, but we were both determined to keep going. I stayed up late to help Marty with his classwork as well as my own, setting up systems for note-taking so he could continue his classes. He survived and graduated. He was offered a job at a firm in Brooklyn. We moved, and I transferred to Columbia. Afterwards, I began searching for a clerkship. Despite being the top of my class, judges continued to reject me. I said to myself, I was the 3 no's. I was a woman, Jewish, and a mother. Nevertheless, I eventually gained a clerkship with the help of a teacher and began working. Following my clerkship, I eventually had another child, and I continued to teach and work as an advocate. 3 of my cases went before the Supreme Court, and we won 2 of them. However, I gave up my work as an advocate to become a judge in Washington, D.C. A few years later, President Clinton nominated me to the Supreme Court. The confirmation hearing was grueling. People worried that my past as an advocate meant I could not be impartial, but I proved them wrong in many significant cases. Marty eventually died of cancer. I was devastated, but continued to work till the end, in spite of my numerous health problems. I urge you all to continue breaking barriers and stand up for what you believe.
Good evening, everyone. I am Audrey Lord, and I am a lesbian mother warrior poet. Like many artists, I had a complicated life. I was born on February 18, 1934, and grew up in New York with my 2 parents, Frederick Byron Lord and Linda Gertrude Belmar Lord, who immigrated to the States from the West Indies. Growing up, I had a much darker complexion than my mother, which led her to distrust me. She would tell me, "You didn't trust anyone whose face is black because their heart is black." My mother's rejection of me only made me long for her love more. I felt out of place in my own home. I was legally blind before the age of 5, clumsy, incoherent, born left-handed, a stutter, in which I got whipped repeatedly for, fat and black. By my own account, I was lonely, unwanted, and unloved. I was lost as a child, but finally I found a sanctuary in poetry. While I attended secondary school at Hunter's, I became all too familiar of the racial injustices that surrounded me. At my other school, I had been surrounded by other black kids, but here I was one of the only ones. While I tried to talk to my parents about feeling isolated at school, they simply told me that this was the way things were in the world. Also during this time, I was feeling new things about my attraction towards people. All the other girls started falling in love with boys, but I wasn't. I had my eyes on someone else, particularly my female teachers. I tried to get their attention with flowers and cards, but my efforts failed me. Like any teenager, I was unaware of who I was. DeVoe wrote about me saying, at the time, she had neither an articulated black identity nor a firm sense of her sexuality, which contributed to a sense of feeling out of place. I wrote about those feelings of isolation and began to
understand myself more. After graduating Hunter's College with a BA in 1959 and then going on to earn a Master's of Library Science from Columbia, I gained the confidence to conquer the literary world. During the 60s, I wrote countless poems and became associated with the civil rights and women's liberation movement. In 1968, I wrote my first book, The First Cities, which detailed the intersectionality between class, race, sex, sexual orientation, and gender. I wrote, "Certainly there are very real differences between us of race, age, and sex, but it is not those differences between us that are separating us. It is rather our refusal to recognize those differences and to examine the distortions which result from our misnaming them and their effect upon human behavior and human expectation. Even though we are all different, those differences are what make us who we are, and embracing them can be what connects us." As I experienced second-wave feminism, I noticed a lack of Black representation for Black women and sought to change that. For me, and so many other Black women at the time, the main ideas of second-wave feminism only focused on the struggles of white women. I wrote, "As white women ignore their built-in privilege of whiteness and define women as other in terms of their own experiences alone, then women of color become other. Well, yes, white women are oppressed for being women. Black women are oppressed for being both Black and a woman. Though white women found my ideas abrasive, harsh, they resonated with so many others like me. Coming to terms with my sexuality took me some time, but it finally happened when I divorced my husband in 1970. I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 1977 at the age of 43, and just 6 years later, in 1983, I was diagnosed with liver cancer. While battling breast cancer, I felt very alone, which prompted me to write the Cancer Journals. In it, I talked about the isolation and loneliness I experienced. Before I passed from cancer, I stated in a documentary, "What I leave behind has a life of its own." I've said this about poetry. I've said it about children. Well, in a sense, I'm saying it about the very artifact of who I have been. Through writing, I was able to make a lifelong connection with like-minded people. I hope my work can give you a new way to look at the world around you and to challenge the injustices and make the world a better place.
Good evening. I am Jim Henson, best known as the man who made the Muppets. When I was young, my ambition was to be one of the people who made a difference in this world. I was always a creative person. As a kid, I enjoyed watching TV and making art, and it seems my art has outlasted me. I strongly believe that puppetry is for everyone, and not just children. And for a good reason. If I had let myself continue with the belief that puppetry isn't something grown men do for a living, I would have never made the Muppets or any of the shows they started, such as Sesame Street or The Muppet Show. However, those aren't the only things they've done with puppetry. I started off making commercials, and apparently funny commercials were rare before my time. One of them was for Wilkins Coffee. For this project, I created 2 new characters, the skinny, rounded, excitable Wilkins, who will drink Wilkins Coffee, and the squatty, triangular, grumpy Wilkins, who won't. One of my first shows was called Sam and Friends. From the very beginning, it was the medium of television that fascinated me. In my spare time, I'd be in the control room trying to understand what was going on, and the technicians loved teaching me, because I really learned my lessons well. I couldn't wait to try out these things on Sam and Friends. I was always curious about anything that could help me with my idea for that show. It was about a guy named Sam with a bunch of abstract friends, such as the famous Kermit, who was not yet a frog. But with time, Kermit evolved into the frog he is today, being a news reporter on Sesame Street and starring in his own series, The Muppet Show. Other puppet-related projects included The Dark Crystal. In spite of my sudden death at the age of 53, my work continued to have an impact on the world, and puppetry thrives.
Evening, folks. I'm Kurt Cobain. I was born February 20th, 1967 in Aberdeen, Washington. My parents loved each other, and they loved me and my sister Kim. They tried to give us the best childhood they could, but that went downhill fast since we were financially and they mostly paid attention to us, so the love for each other kind of dissolved, leading to divorce sometime later, an event I still blame myself for to this day. School was interesting. At about eighth grade, I turned to drugs to cope with trauma, later adding alcohol to the mix. When I was about 17 or 18, my father invited a Navy recruiter to the house. I agreed to listen, and actually was considering enlisting because, for one, I'd be off my parents' backs, and for another, food and shelter was provided. In the end, I decided not to enlist and continue trying to make a living for myself with music on the side. Eventually, music became a career. I formed several bands before Nirvana, but none were particularly successful. I still wanted to be a rock star, though. I'd been playing drums at a very young age, then got a guitar when I was older. So, when looking for a drummer for Nirvana, I was extremely picky about it. Eventually, when we did make it big, I hated the fact that I was idolized. I hated the attention and the supposed idea about me having all the answers to things. Above all, what I truly disliked was how the band sounded. It was too overproduced, but in order to make it at the time and be successful, the song had to be. In spite of that, we worked toward the idea that rock should sound kind of raw. In my song, Smells Like Teen Spirit, I was simply belting the lyrics, not caring much about how I sounded. I faced other challenges in life, but my heart was always in the music.
It's not women's liberation, it's women's men's liberation. In my most influential feminist cases, I represented men. I was able to show that the injustices and unfair treatment faced by women impacted men too.
Can you give us an example of such a case?
Yes, indeed. In Weinberg versus Wiesenfield, I represented a widower who had been denied survival benefits by Social Security because he was a man. They had always assumed that a woman would depend on a man's income, not the other way around. I showed that a man who survived a salary-earning wife and cared for their children deserved the same protection as a woman who survived her husband. By chipping away one more at a time, I was able to help gradually change the attitudes that reinforce sexist prejudices that assumed women had to be dependent on men, and to persuade people that the feminist point of view is simply a human one.
That's a clever strategy, Ginsburg, and an insightful one. The patriarchy affects both men and women in a negative way, and it must be dealt with. Helping men to see that this isn't only a woman's issue is a good way to go about things. Unfortunately, through my life, feminism has often left out people like me.
Yes, feminism, like most important issues, has its flaws.
Although I'm not as aware of more modern feminism, I think women are as capable as men and can do anything a man can.
Annie, what was it like for you to work in a job field surrounded by men?
Well, Mrs. Ginsburg, it was a challenge to become more than a joke to many men, and even to some women. The best way I found to gain their respect was to simply become better than they were. Did any of you other women ever run into a similar situation?
I certainly did, Annie. But as you said, women accomplishing the same jobs as men isn't exceptional. My role as the first woman to be the CEO of a Hollywood production company made it seem that it's a bizarre thing that women weren't capable of doing that before.
Exactly. Women belong in all places where decisions are being made. It shouldn't be that women are the exception. When I joined law school, the dean invited all of the women in my year and asked us why we wanted to be lawyers. We needed to prove why we'd taken a man's spot. When my turn came around, I stood up, dropping the ashtray on my lap, and I lied that it was because I wanted to better understand my husband's job to help him. But really, I became a lawyer for selfish reasons. I thought I could do a lawyer's job better than any other.
As a supporter of women, we welcome all women who can meet us face to face, beyond objectification and beyond guilt. To stand your ground and insist on being heard is no easy task, but an extremely commendable one.
I completely agree. I worked with my husband for many years, and when we were first
husband was hard. People thought at first that since he was a man, he would be the face of the show, but he wasn't. I was, and I had more to say in everything about it.
Oh, pardon me, ex-husband. My husband Frank had been married before and had gotten divorced. Divorce was rare in my time and considered immoral by many people. Well, I didn't find it wrong. My family did, and that was one of the main reasons they didn't accept my marriage. That, and the fact that he was 10 years older than me.
Well, I had 12 beautiful wives.
Oh God, Mr. Teach, I was very satisfied with one husband. What compelled you to have so many wives?
Well, Four Eyes, traveling free men like me needed many wives. Of course, women cannot be allowed on the ship.
Though I appreciate the observation, I don't feel they are pertinent. Nevertheless, would you please expand your belief on women?
Well, Four Eyes, you, of course, don't understand how a boat works. A woman is bad luck on the ship.
What makes you think that?
Well, a woman might distract the crew and cause calamities at sea. Also, the sea is a feminine beast, and she would not want other women taking her attention.
Oh, Blackbeard, as a fellow appreciator of women, I can say that I do not get distracted by merely being around them. I think that might just be a you problem.
I also believe women should not be able to use guns. You are the truth.
I see. And what makes you think that women can't shoot guns?
Well, you shouldn't shoot if you can't take a shot.
If I recall correctly, Blackbeard, it was you who couldn't take a shot.
Well, I took at least 4 shots and at least 20 stab wounds before I died. So, Reagan, do you know women need to know her place away from men's work?
Pardon me, Mr. Teach. I think women are as capable as men in regards to skill. In many cases, I find them more intelligent. Without them, men would still be walking around in pursuits.
Now, of course, I understand if a woman would want to become a pirate to get out of the system. And if she wants to do so on her own, it is her choice. She should just stay away from that.
And why should women stay away from men, Blackbeard? Also, how would they even avoid men? Weren't pirates mostly men?
Well, Caravan, they would first need to act like men and dress like men. Maybe keep to themselves. Mary Reed and Anne Bonny were 2 women who did so in my time. Most people thought they were men. When they were caught with Calico Jack Rackham, the only reason they weren't hanged with them was because they were both quick and would travel, but rebellious.
They were still women. You sound a bit contradictory. You want women to stay away from ships, but might tolerate it if they look like men.
Women today are still being called upon to stretch across the gap of male ignorance and educate men as to our existence and our needs. This is an old primary tool of all oppressors to keep the oppressed occupied with the master's concerns.
Well, I had no personal experience with sexism. My sister was discouraged from learning by her own family simply because she was a girl. I helped her to learn and to find a love of the sciences.
Because women in my line of work were less frequent, when I did work with them, I was often pitted against them. In the Wild West show, I worked with a woman named Lillian Smith, who Buffalo Bill hired without consulting me. When Lillian arrived, she told people, Annie Oakley is done for.
It is concerning that in our society has consistently made women fight with one another rather than working together.
Yes, I agree, Miss Gold. I'm also concerned about how it has become a battle between genders.
Audrey, you said earlier that feminism hasn't always included people like you. Could you elaborate on that?
Of course, Jim. In my experience, feminism has typically been to represent white women. That is why, rather than the term feminism, I would use the term womanism or black feminism.
Audrey, could you explain the difference between white feminism and black feminism?
In the 60s, second-wave feminism became hugely popular, but as I said, only for a certain group of people, white women. This was intentional, as at the time, feminism only focused on the ideas of workplace equality and household equality, and other problems that specifically targeted white women. This led to women of color feeling left out of the feminist movement. This is one example of intersectionality. In fact, every single person in this room is affected by intersectionality. Everyone in their life
I've never experienced a plague in my life.
Intersectionality is not literally a plague, Blackbeard, although in a way it can feel like it. Rather, it is the idea that different social categories can affect you in different ways. That one person can have multiple layers of intersecting identities, such as gender, race, class, religion, ethnicity, and more, that can either empower or oppress one. Does that make sense?
Some layers of rank and human value. I like intersectionality, and I believe I used it in fit for some.
No, Blackbeard, that is all wrong.
You may have gotten ahead of yourself, Blackbeard. I don't think that's what Audrey meant.
Not in the slightest.
Could you give us an example to clear up any miscommunications?
Yes, of course. Well, let's take you for example, Annie. You are a woman, and so you face systemic oppression because of that. But at the same time, you are also white, so which means you experience privilege from that.
I understand what you mean. I've definitely felt the hardships of being a woman, especially in my time. But I also can acknowledge that such challenges are magnified much more for African Americans.
In my experiences, I am a Black feminist. I mean, I recognize that my power, as well as my primary oppressions, come as a result of my Blackness, as well as my womanness, and therefore, my struggles on both of these fronts are inseparable.
As a Jewish woman, I face such things. I struggled to find a clerkship because I was all the three no's, a woman, Jewish, and a mother. On their own, each was barely acceptable to most judges, but together they were too much.
When we create out of our experiences as feminists of color, women of color, we have to develop those structures that will present and circulate our culture.
I recognize that I'm not one to talk about discrimination much, but my coming from a Jewish family has affected my life. I was rejected by some colleges because I was Jewish. There was a system in the U.S. called the Jewish quota that limited the number of Jewish students in a school.
But that's exactly my point, Richard. Even though you may have had privilege because you were a white man, you also faced oppression because of your religious background.
I see. That makes sense. Thank you, Ms. Ward.
I have to fight against these injustices too, not for me, but for my ex-husband. When we were transitioning my show, I Love Lucy, from radio to television, CBS didn't want me and Desi, a Latin American from Cuba with a Spanish accent, to be shown together. They wanted an all-American family, an all-white family, but I fought against that.
To some extent, such responses to differences are normal. People tend to favor those like themselves, or those who belong to their tribe. But how did it develop into the kind of exaggerated racism that reinforces the challenges of intersectionality that you were talking about, Audrey? Where did it start?
Well, it started from the same root that rock and roll and the blues did.
Muddy Waters, are you saying that it started with music?
No, but American music sparks from it.
What do you mean?
You see, Kurt Cobain here played a kind of rock I would most call grunge, with its roots coming somewhere from funk. What would you say your influences were, Kurt?
I love the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, the Velvet Underground, and the Pixies. But then I read what William Burroughs said about Leadbelly. So I bought a couple records, and now he turns out to be my absolute favorite of all time in music. I absolutely love it more than any rock and roll I ever heard.
Well, funny enough, the Beatles were inspired by my music and tunes, and Leadbelly was inspired by the old black R&B and folk tradition, and he inspired you as well. Rock was sparked from R&B, what we used to call race music. R&B goes back to swing, jazz, and blues, black musicians like Robert Johnson. And on top of the blues, rooted in the spirituals and work songs, which helped African-American people struggle with misery and slavery.
Muddy Waters, how did the blues develop?
Oh, the blues scale came from a bending and blending of African and European scale. No, of course, African rhythm and quality response. Africans were enslaved and brought across the ocean to make other people rich, and the slavers gradually started to use color and caste as the justification for it, so they wouldn't feel guilty about chattel slavery. The idea became like a disease, like the plague Blackbeard mentioned. It spread and infected most of the world, and out of that suffering tragedy came powerful music.
That's just how life is. I believe it is fine for some people to be slaves, but not for me. If I can make a profit selling people, then I will.
Have you no empathy, no humanity, Blackbeard?
I do have humanity. I just believe slavery is a necessary evil.
is part of the reality of the world. Although most of the loot I seized from other ships was cargo such as sugar, wine, cocoa, indigo, cotton, and sometimes gold and silver, it was occasionally slaves.
You believe that people getting captured and forced to serve a master they have no right in serving is acceptable?
I think you are struggling with definitions back there. It is okay. A lot of people do. But slavery is non-consensual labor being done for free. It's not a choice.
Yes, but if they wanted to be free, they would be free.
You think that the choice is in the hands of the people being enslaved and oppressed, and not in the hands of the people benefiting from their misfortune?
So do you not see the fact of slaves as a blinding concept? The choice is among the least likely things to be given to a slave. Slavery is not something you can simply free yourself if I want to. No, the soul of slavery bans freedom entirely.
I cannot hide my anger to spare your guilt, nor hurt feelings, nor answering anger. For to do so insults and trivializes all of our efforts. So I will just come out and say it. Blackbeard, I have met a lot of bigoted people in my life, but you have just made the top of that list.
Well, being at the top is always a good thing. You like a lot of it. If you want something enough, you can take it.
How might you take something when you've been stripped of all power to do so?
Well, I've come forward just like you people, but I rose up, so you people can too.
Being able to build yourself up doesn't just depend on how willing you are to work at it.
Blackbeard, you're saying this like there isn't an unlucky soul in the world. Poverty is one thing, freedom is another.
Well, you just might be unfit to rule.
And who says you're fit to rule?
Me.
You sit on a self-looking throne, using your feelings of joy and power your nation of faith glory. But your understanding of the person's soul being so bleak, you become only a sad man.
How did none of your crewmates do?
The irony of this discussion is that increasing the slave trade is what brought about the end of piracy after my time. Pirates weren't the biggest slave traders, merchants were, and they wanted the Navy to protect their growing market in the triangular trade of the Atlantic Ocean.
That may be so, Blackbeard, but Muddy Waters was right when he said that racism became an infection. People applied it to other groups too.
Which ones were you thinking of, Annie?
White settlers saw people such as the Lakota as brutal savages. During my time, Native American revolts were very common. The show I worked on represented Native Americans as the villains in the show. Crowds could see Pawnee and Sioux Indians attacking and burning settlers' cabins, and then shout with relief when Buffalo Bill and his fearless posse came to the rescue with guns ablazing. Of course, in reality, we were the ones invading indigenous lands and bringing the plagues that killed 90% of them.
Do you possibly see that the depiction of indigenous people in your shows may have perpetuated hurtful stereotypes?
It may have, although our boss Buffalo Bill treated them with fairness and honesty, and over the years many great warriors and chiefs joined the show, including Chief Sitting Bull, who was a big part of the Native American Revolution. He and I became close friends, and he told me I could be his spiritual daughter. Sitting Bull was the one who gave me the nickname Little Shore Shot.
For my many years playing my instruments, I found this thing that was slowing me down from my dreams. It wasn't any war or inner conflict of indecisiveness, but instead it was the way people looked at me, how they saw me. The music I made and that I sought to share was limited, and it stopped that time, all because of the way I spoke and the shade of my skin.
I'm sorry to hear that, Muddy Waters. Sesame Street tried to respond to that kind of injustice and became a trailblazer for black representation in television during my time.
Jim, are you saying that television and entertainment have a role in combating racism?
Yes, I think it can, along with education and many other approaches.
I suppose you're right. Many of my songs satirize various kinds of social injustice and lazy thinking.
I agree, Kurt. Entertainment can be used to get people thinking, but it can also just be an escape for them or a way to bring them joy or laughter, which is also important. I performed in many places, including circuses, vaudeville, and other shows around the world.
Would you describe vaudeville for us?
Certainly. Vaudeville is a type of variety show. A veritable cavalcade of comedians, jugglers, dancers, magicians, acrobats, musicians, and dramatic actors, and all for a short, precise acts of the highest entertainment value. A day in the theater promises 12 to 15 acts to amuse, inspire, inspire, electrify, edify, and enlighten, for one small price. I performed shooting expeditions in many of them.
Okay, understood.
Jim, if I understand correctly, you had a type of vaudeville show, only it was more for children than the typical show from my time being targeted for adults.
Yes, Opie, that is the case. The Muppet Show is a variety show of sorts. It consists of many acts by different Muppets, who are basically actors, with permanent hosts. The acts include Gonzo, who performs tricks, Fozzie Bear, who makes jokes, some less regular acts, and acts with the human guest star. But contrary to your assumption, Andy, I made the show because I was tired of people treating the Muppets as if they were only for kids because of Sesame Street.
I performed vaudeville shows too, Annie. My ex-husband and I went on tour with them as a way of promoting the I Love Lucy show. They were so successful that CBS finally decided to support it. Entertainment and its industry was my entire life. I worked on shows, behind the scenes in many projects, and later I acted in plays.
I absolutely agree, Lucille. Entertainment is not just an occupation, it's a lifestyle.
It sure is, Opie. Entertainment is for everyone. My Muppets may have looked childish, but it is my goal to show that entertainment like this is not just for children.
I watched the Muppets when I was younger, and eventually even a band's song Smells Like Teen Spirit. Kind of like a full circle moment there, man. Sadly, Courtney wasn't a fan, putting the blame on my buddy Grohl's shoulders. Yeesh.
Tell us about your own performances, Kurt.
At first, they weren't very popular. I wanted to focus on the underground punk scene and get away from the overused pop music of the 80s. In spite of that, somehow the grunge movement became extremely popular. Maybe it's because people misunderstood what it was about. We were criticizing the problems of society and trying to return music to its grittier roots, something everyone could participate in. In the end, I guess I felt conflicted between our success and our ideals.
It's good to have ideals, but I think it's also fine to have a rousing good time. That was one of the goals of R&B, and I think a good most of y'all would have enjoyed it. I myself am quite capable of it and can teach a thing or two about it. Even when the songs about sad things, they get you moving. Yar!
What's that you're talking about?
No, it ain't kind of thing. Though, if it were WED and stuff. As I said before, R&B is a kind of music full of rocking, musical swing and taps, all of the heavy beat, how sweet people often beat. It puts our pain, freedom, joy, triumph, and failure into songs with blues guitars, bass, drums, piano, sax, and more.
So you use music to represent something? To express your ideals and morals?
I guess so, but it's also to sing about all kinds of feelings.
I think it's crucial for entertainment to represent good American morals. It's an important method of communication.
I do agree. I've always been an avid opera consumer. I even had one written about me.
That's marvelous, Ruth. But, Ronald, what exactly are the good American morals that you want in entertainment?
A focus on family values, on personal and religious freedom, of the whole, on the whole American ideal.
The values of my music, it's in my mojo.
For me, music was a small part of my life, but it was a demonstration of my free spirit. I learned to play a type of drum while teaching in Brazil.
Feynman, you play drums? That's cool. I played drums a lot when I was a boy.
Yes, I enjoyed playing drums for fun. When I started to work at Caltech, my colleagues would see me playing drums and drinking and say, "Some professor you are."
Hey, what about playing a part in a song? I'm thinking, Feynman finds love. I think it'd be a hit.
I already have, more than once.
For me, liquor was a great source of entertainment. It made my life one big party.
Sometimes the party goes too far. I actually stopped drinking later. My life has been starting to become a craving.
I had to quit smoking for the same reason.
I don't know. A drink or two makes everyone hear my song board happy as usual.
The party can never go too far if it never ends.
As I said, I enjoyed a party as much as anyone, but teaching is more important to me, and sometimes drinking got in the way of that. I don't believe I can really do without teaching. I don't see the point of learning if you don't pass it on to others. I love teaching, and good education is extremely important.
I agree, Richard. Education can be a gateway into a whole new world of possibilities. That being said, I don't think one has to be properly educated to be respected. I was fortunate enough to get a good education, but a lot of kids in my neighborhood were not as fortunate.
I tried to make education accessible and even entertaining for everyone. I even tried to make complicated topics such as physics
respect for Sesame Street, Henson. You made valuable educational content specifically for Black children. If it had been around when I was a child, I know it would have been my favorite program on TV.
I'll be honest, that was mostly Joe Gans Cooney's idea. She wanted the target audience to be inner city kids. And I'm all for everyone calmly existing together without discrimination, so who am I to oppose the idea?
What was your philosophy about teaching, Jim?
Well, I believe that children should be taught in a way that doesn't talk down to them. Children are smart, the most sophisticated people I know. Besides, they're all children.
Well said, Jim. The youth of America holds a lot of power.
Sure, is it true that you dropped out of school?
Yeah, I dropped out of high school 2 weeks before graduating. But I do understand the importance of education. It can come in many different forms, and for me, learning out of high school did serve me as well as learning music. I did, however, do some not-so-wise things while in school, starting in 8th grade. Don't do drugs, kids.
I was a teacher along my life. I was a professor before I was a judge. I was a highly sought-after teacher. Many described me as having high expectations within the work produced. My clerk's writings would be sent off to be revised regarding grammar and citations. One of my clerks said about me, she would mark up drafts that her law clerks turned in, and then sit down with us and go line by line, explaining why she made the changes she made. She was a teacher as well as a boss.
I acquired my education among the birds and the wildflowers. To make sure other young women got the education they deserved, I helped pay for their schooling.
I was known as a bit of a teacher to my juniors. I always wanted the best for them, but sometimes I would have to discipline them. They acted poorly.
Because of your name?
My name, Edward, has nothing to do with education.
No, your last name is Teach, right?
It's Teach or Batch, something like that.
You forgot your own name?
Some say it's Teach, some say it's Batch, but I've been dead for a long time. I want a black beard.
Right, but Teach would be an awfully educational name for a pirate.
I like the idea of pirate teaching. Here's an idea for a Muppet skit. We could have a Muppet person with a black beard in front of a black board, get it, in giving a lesson in reading. If a slate is slipped up, maybe you'd have to walk the plank, because reading is a very important skill and it unlocks a whole new world.
Definitely. Reading is the key that opens the door to many good things in life. Reading shaped my dreams, and more, reading helped me make my dreams come true. Although walking the plank for your mistakes might be a little extreme.
Yes, Ginsburg. My ability to understand my feelings and translate them into works of literature has helped people understand their own feelings. Mr. Cobain, I understand your songs have helped other people understand their feelings. What did your lyrics mean to you?
I'll draw an example from my song Smells Like Teen Spirit. The line, "Here we are now, entertain us," conveys the expectation for things, say, entertainment, to happen automatically. Instead of being only spectators in life, people need to participate in it, to think and act and create.
Are there any other songs that are especially meaningful to you?
A song that means a lot to me is Dumb. As I explained in the 1993 interview, it was just about people who are easily amused, people who not only aren't capable of progressing their intelligence, but are totally happy watching 10 hours of television and really enjoying it. I've met a lot of dumb people. Again, life should have more to it than just watching someone else's show.
What about you, Muddy Waters? Did your lyrics have a deeper meaning?
Oh, yes, I'd say that they do. I take inspiration from my own life, kind of weaving it into my music. Listen close enough and you're sure to hear it. How about y'all? Anyone else find their life in somewhere place over?
I participated in writing a biography about me. That made my life part of my work.
I wrote a great deal of poetry in my childhood. In my creative prose writing, I spun grand stories of American perseverance of many sorts, but usually of men come home from war, dispirited, embittered by what they've seen.
Reagan, did your stories happen to write about the perseverance of the American citizens who face constant oppression and opposition?
As I said, they focused on the challenges faced by all those who endured the hardships of World War I.
For me, I write for those women who do not speak, for those who do not have a voice because they were so terrified, because they were taught to respect fear more than ourselves. We've been taught that silence would save us, but it won't. Working as a librarian, a writer in residence, and a literary professor, I felt that the written word could be more powerful source of change.
What do you mean?
Poetry is the way we help give name to the nameless, so it can be thought. As they become known to and accepted by us, our feelings and the honest exploration of them become sanctuaries and spawning grounds for the most radical and daring ideas. To dig the meaning out of these images to understand the pressure that seems to crush is also the alchemy that transforms the ordinary coal into a shining gem.
Those are really powerful images and ideas, Audrey. While literature wasn't the main focus of my career, I did write an autobiography. Did any of the rest of you do any writing?
As I mentioned, I've written and published a few books myself, and written forwards to countless others.
Well, I myself was not considered a writer. My husband Frank would write poetry in his spare time. He was a sentimental man and liked to write about nature and friendship and the passage of seasons.
And we'll all take a break for about long enough to get some dessert, if you wish. But please let
Is this part of the show?
Interesting. I don't usually think of scientists as comical.
Well, Mrs. Ball, while you and I were both creative people, our experiences with comedy were different. While I used it to teach and simply as part of the way I taught people, comedy for you is a major part of your life, as it's your job. Tell us more about how you used it professionally or otherwise.
I did some teaching too. I ran a 32-week comedy workshop, but I was the one who learned something. You cannot teach someone comedy. Either they have it or they don't. Comedy was my life, but it was also my work. I spent many long days at the studios, but there was also comedy outside my professional life. It's just what makes me who I am. I even have a philosophy of comedy.
Lucille, what was your philosophy?
Well, Ronald, I call it an enchanted sense of play, which is a scientific approach to making people laugh. It's skipping into things rather than plotting them out. It's looking at the ridiculous side of things, sometimes even when they are a little rough. It's having a happy frame of mind, looking at things from a child's point of view and belief.
What's an example of that particularly works for you?
Well, one of my best was during the episode Lucy Does the Tango. It was a combination of contrasting factors. The audience knew that I was hiding a bunch of eggs in my shirt. And Desi came home early and wanted to practice the tango we were going to dance in a performance. I was trying to protect the eggs while doing a dance that put them in danger and not let him know. But the worry showed on my face. And the tension kept building till he suddenly pulled me close and all the eggs got smashed between us. We received the longest studio audience laugh in TV history.
Miss Ball, it really is a shame you weren't able to appear on the Muppet Show. Your entry was unfortunately crossed off the list, so we have something with references here on the Lucy.
Thanks, Jim. You should really talk about your wonderful shows that included comical aspects. I quite enjoyed them.
That pleases me to hear, Lucy. The fact that you enjoy my show is exactly what I wanted out of making the Muppets. It's a medium of comedy that can reach a wide audience that includes more than just children. Plus, who doesn't love puppets?
I don't know. This whole puppet show's a little shallow to me.
I used to think that as well. For some time, I didn't think puppets would be something a grown adult would work with. So once I graduated college, I left behind my old puppet show, Sam and Friends, to become a painter. However, when I traveled around Europe, I found that puppetry was enjoyed by a much wider audience there. People said it's the Russian massacre here at Sergei Rostov were highly respected, so once I returned, it reignited my desire to work with puppets. Sometimes my puppets ignited things too. I'd love to find any excuse I could find to use explosions. I found them hilarious.
I used explosions and lit matches in my hat and hair to inspire fear, not laughter.
You could say that fearful explosions became an important part of my career, too. Manhattan Project was far from funny. It brought death and destruction to many thousands of innocent civilians. In fact, seeing science used for such a warlike purpose and being one of those responsible for it is the main reason I stopped working for the government for a while.
What was your attitude towards science, Dr. Feynman?
I was not a stereotypical science. I had a personality, and I didn't always follow exact rules. I relied on my understanding of nature to guide me wherever I would lead.
I would consider myself as an expert in science of the sea.
My science is in my mojo. Any ladies here? I bet here she could.
Well, that isn't exactly science, but I'd like to think I did some of that myself.
John, what are my chances here?
Richard, did you have anything else you wanted to say about your view of science?
Well, for one thing, I do not think that science and art are mutually exclusive. I have friends tell me that science takes the beauty out of things, makes things dull. I disagree with him. I think that art and science can coexist, so to say, and that science can even add to the beauty of things.
You're right, Richard. We need to coexist in all contexts, including art and science. I have demonstrated that art and science are not exclusive by using the art form of puppetry to teach science to children.
Yes, Mr. Henson, coexistence is important in many areas of differences. For example, I am Jewish, but I can coexist with people of other religions.
Religion is important to my family, too, Ruth. But by high school, I was an avowed atheist. As a scientific person, I was just too inclined to ask, but how can that be?
I was a devout Christian my whole life. My mother and father were raised Catholic, but my mother, the only practicing member of the couple, converted to the Disciples of Christ Church just after my older brother was born.
Though I was raised Catholic, I incorporated African spiritualism into my beliefs.
I was a true man of God, exploring all of seas.
Gisbert, did your religion affect you while you were a judge?
I am a judge born and raised, and proud of being a Jew. The demands for justice runs through the entirety of the Jewish tradition. I hope in my years on the bench at the Supreme Court, I had the strength and the courage to remain constant in the service of that man. Though it was always important to me to value the separation of church and state. What about you, Reagan? What were your thoughts about religion and government?
My policy was mainly kept to secular matters, but other Republican figures of my time and I defined conservative politics as aligned with Christian rights.
While the union of government and religion tends to destroy government and to degrade religion, separating the two preserves the legitimacy of each. The separation is a fundamental part of our nation. I hope you know that.
I may have been raised religious, but my views became more complex.
What do you mean by that, Kurt?
I explored Christian ideas as well as atheist ones. However, the concept of Buddhism also interested me, seeking enlightenment and freedom from pain and suffering in the external world, which is why we named the band Nirvana. I suppose it's a bit presumptuous to do so because it implies we've already achieved that state. The reality is we were probably a little tongue-in-cheek about it, but also we wanted to reach for it.
Sometimes people think they can reach for nirvana by creating utopia on Earth.
What do you mean?
I mean those who were misled by their idealism into communist ideology and did not see that it was just another path to tyranny, not freedom.
Would you please elaborate on that?
I'll speak out just as partially against communism as I have fascism. It is the most threatening infiltration of our country in its entire history, and its infiltration of our entertainment is particularly insidious. In entertainment, it threatens children, and in our children, it threatens our future as a nation. Its attack on the states, on the free market, and particularly on religion, threatens every man, not just a politician, or a statesman, or a Christian man.
Many of us in Hollywood got in trouble over communism at one point.
Lucille, we both had the fortune, or maybe misfortune, to start prominently in Hollywood during the Red Scare. On opposite sides, that is. I stuck myself firmly on the capitalist side, while you found yourself thrown to the wolves due to the wolf censuses. I was misled into liberals' views. How did you find your way back to more sensible ones?
My views were always sensible, Ronald. I am not a communist, and I never was one. I was questioned many times and found innocent. My grandfather wanted me to register as a communist for voting, and sometimes you do things to please the ones you love. So I did, but it didn't mean anything to me. When they found that registration document, it could have ruined my whole career, but I made it clear that I was not a communist. If I had been, I would have just stuck with my beliefs, but I proved to them that that wasn't who I was.
Now, I don't see what all the fuss about communism is. I am a socialist. I think we need to prioritize the well-being of the community over the comfort of the wealthy.
That makes sense, Audrey, although it doesn't have to be through communism.
Freedom is for the people who are brave enough to take it. I chose the private life instead of the naval life, because I could do what I wanted, take what I wanted, steal what I wanted, and go where I wanted.
That attitude has led many to the problems we face, Blackbeard. The principal core of any system which defines the good in terms of the profit rather than in terms of human need, or which defines human need to the exclusion of the psychic and emotional components of that need, is that robs our work of its erotic value, its erotic power, and life, appeal, and fulfillment. Only seeing humans as tools is horrifying.
Hogwash! Everything is mine to take. With the British government neglecting the colonies, I was able to steal what I wanted without the Navy causing me any problems. Since the British didn't have any resources to enforce their own tariffs and trade regulations until the mid-1700s, even an ordinary American merchants got in the habit of smuggling with piracy and out of the habit of paying taxes. These tendencies later contributed to their revolution.
What made you work for the British government in the first place? You could have just become a pilot to begin with.
That's just it. As a privateer, I had worked for them, but afterwards I returned to outright piracy and worked for myself.
And how were pirate ships run? I heard something about everyone having a vote.
Unlike the hierarchical, brutal British Navy, pirate ships were somewhat democratic. That was an important part of the appeal. Everyone had a say, and the officers were elected or demoted by the crew. In fact, pirates were among the influences of early American ideas about democracy. However, I instilled so much fear in the other pirates that no one would be disloyal to me. I used psychological warfare to gain and keep power. For example, I lit my beard up to make me look like the devil himself.
That sort of abuse of power is exactly why the American Constitution developed its system of checks and balances to prevent any individual or group from gaining too much clout, whether as a singular executive, a group of representative lawmakers, or a panel of appointed judges. Each one should have limits imposed by the others.
Well, a lot of times the people who have unbound power are the ones who make them, the politicians.
I dislike politicians and politics in general. They overcomplicate what should be simple. I have found that the government doesn't always care about the people doing their dirty work. When I worked at Los Alamos, I was sent to tell some of the workers at the Oak Ridge plant about the dangers of uranium. The poor guys weren't told anything about it to maintain secrecy, but I had to tell them not to handle it without protection, or not to put too much in one place. It could explode. I shouldn't have had to tell them that.
I agree. People should know all about those imperial pigs controlling everything and governing everything. Everything in this world is mine to take.
As Ginsburg said earlier, tyrannical attitudes like that need checks on them. Nevertheless, the checks and the justice system under the Constitution has time and time again failed Black people and people of color. Even though you may have been a part of this flawed system, Ginsburg, I know that throughout your life you also challenged it.
I fully recognize the issues that are ingrained within the justice system, specifically towards people of color. I did my best to acknowledge and help correct the issues. To quote Washington, I am conscious of intentional error. I am nevertheless too sensible of my defect not to think it probable that I may have committed many errors. I did my best to follow the lead of my colleagues who are black. I never worked as a front runner within these issues, allowing my colleagues to thrive.
I wish that other people with your position of authority, such as Ronald Reagan, here used their power the way you did.
Now, I hardly think that's fair. I worked for my governmentship and presidency and reformed the conservative identity.
Mr. Reagan, I hate what you stood for. Did you ever see that picture I drew of you?
I did, Mr. Cobain. As a fellow American, I respect your right of free speech. However, that blatant disrespect for a former United States president is, quite frankly, appalling.
That's what's wrong with you bigoted politicians. Your reign of terror on American democracy ruined the hope for a new, better generation.
Mr. Cobain, I believe that each and every generation has the same obligation to better this nation. I find your nihilism disheartening, because at this country's core, there are no Republicans, no Democrats, just Americans. Yes, we have our differences, but let us always remember that what unites us far outweighs whatever divides us. Now, I'm not sure what party you belong to, but you are American. Isn't that what matters?
Oh, give me a break.
Just listen to yourselves. You think of yourselves as mature adults, but really you argue like children with a large vocabulary. It's incredibly important to realize how big an impact your voice has. You must be careful with your words. Big Bird is a great big yellow goof, but millions of children watch his antics every day. Children are smart, sometimes smarter than most adults. And I believe we should all just exist together, as it is all about balance. In Sesame Street, there was a segment that focused on poverty to show the kids the real world, which adults often try to hide from them.
Yes, we have to help children learn about our realities, but we also have to look for solutions to them. I grew up poor and had to go work for a horrible family that treated me so badly that I only ever referred to them as the wolves. My family ran out of food and money, so I was the one who needed to hunt squirrels. My mother was so desperate after my father died that she sent me and some of my siblings to live and work in an infirmary.
I too grew up in a poor neighborhood, Annie.
I believe the rich can get all the money, though in sharing with the crew, but of course, I need to keep some of the wealth for myself.
Keeping wealth is not the way to better the world, Blackbeard. Once I was wealthy enough, I started to give to charities helping children who were growing up how I am. If I spend $1 foolishly, I see the tear-stained faces of little children who were beaten as I was.
Helping children's health issues was also important to me, Annie, as I also work with charities.
That is where society has a role. Individual charity isn't enough to solve poverty. The government and the people as a whole are responsible for such issues. It is just a matter of priorities.
So how do governments pay for such priorities? Through raising taxes on the rest of us? I hated them. That's why I smuggled. I believe instead of giving children help, you should let them help themselves.
Reagan, what was your opinion on taxes?
I thought they were a violation of the proper citizens' rights. Unfair taxes stagnate American life. Families cannot prosper and keep America strong if government becomes a Goliath that preys upon their wealth, usurps their rights, and crushes their spirit. A government is as free as it treats its people, and excessive taxation is one of the least I rebuke is overbearing policy.
And all the taxes we do pay go to the military recovery programs.
Of course, I believe our military is one of our strongest assets, not to disrespect other working men. Social programs are government intervention. They make people too comfortable and undermine their self-reliance.
Reagan, you're one of those experts in government who don't know what they're doing. Your rapid escalation of the Cold War could have been disastrous.
What were your thoughts on smuggle?
Mr. Teach, I have to say I strictly oppose it. I believe open and valid trade is best for the economy and public safety. There's a big difference between smuggling and trade. It is important to recognize differences even between us. Acknowledging the differences and resolving it then is an important process, especially with the government.
As I said earlier, there are very real differences between us. But when we can recognize them and struggle against these injustices and distortions, acknowledge truth and celebrate and benefit from those differences and our many gifts, we can seek balance, as Henson said, and something that I hope and work for. Sitting together and talking with all of you, we can look for that common ground, work through our conflicts, or at least try to appreciate what each of us can bring to the table. Americans have declared their goals of freedom and justice for all. They have inspired so many others to reach for them. We must nourish the hope, dedication, and energy to continue to climb.
And the most important unifier, time!
known as white beater because I feel like that is an evolution
like some more?
Elliot.
Supreme Justice, what was your relationship like? What was your marriage like with your husband? Marty was my better half. He always supported me, campaigned for me, and was incredible. A couple of my cases, actually, one of them that went to the Supreme Court came from him. They originally started on his desk, and despite the fact that I told him never to talk to me about tax law, he felt it was important enough to. And he would be the star of when we hosted the dinner parties, mostly because I couldn't cook, but still, he was incredible, and I miss him.
No.
Mr. Edward, how do you grow such a luscious black beard?
So, it's actually all about genetics. So, I was born like this. I shave every day, just like the little prim, so I can, keep it just like this. It's just kind of, it's my look. But now things have changed a bit.
We've got a lot of other hands, so why don't you guys call on people?
Leslie.
Ms. Lord, what was the most frustrating thing when speaking up about civil rights, and what do you think was for you the greater fight, speaking out about civil rights or about women's rights?
Unfortunately, my experiences of being a woman trying to speak out about injustices and being disregarded are not uncommon in my experience, as many other women on the stage know. Even so, I try not to look at the negative aspects. I try to look at all the people that I helped and taught with my writings. Oh, so many people.
Andrew.
Mr. Cobain, you said that dropping out of college was one of the best things.
High school.
High school, sorry. That dropping out of high school was one of the best things that ever happened to you. Do you encourage other aspiring young people?
Probably not. Probably not. And stay in school, people. Stay in school.
Levi?
Teach, you said you were born with a beard?
Yeah.
Didn't you, burn it or something?
Well, so that is actually how I shaved it every day. So I burn it just enough so the hair could go to this perfect length. I've already shaved today, but I can't show you, but...
What color is it, genetically?
Black.
What? Noah.
First, what was it like having different religious ideas than other people, like other people who may have not thought of Buddhist ideas? What was it like?
That is a good question. Yeah, I really remember. I haven't been dead for very long, but I've been dead enough to forget things. Best answer I got. Sorry.
Leo.
Oakley, do you have any tricks that you were particularly known for? And if not, is there anything you wish you would have done?
I was known for shooting cigarettes out of my husband's mouth and splitting cards in half. Overall, though, I feel I had a very successful career and don't regret much. David.
Yeah, good to see you again, Mr. President. I remember, but you and I met at the airport in Anchorage the last time. However, my question is for Miss Ball. Along with Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, why do people call you the mother of science fiction?
I don't know if many people actually know this, unless you're a hardcore Star Trek fan or Mission Impossible fan. But Desilu production company actually were the ones to produce Star Trek and Mission Impossible. And I don't remember, I've been dead for way too long, but I think my husband and I wrote some telling me some things. And I do know that there was references to I Love Lucy in Star Trek. So.
Julie. I have a question for Jen Henson. So, I'm wondering, I know The Dark Crystal and Labyrinth are two of my favorite movies. And I know that they received the best reception when they first came out. Can you speak to how you felt about that?
Well, it was unfortunate. The main cause for the bad reception was because people were used to associating me with the Muppets. So when none of the more famous Muppets, such as Kermit, showed up in Dark Crystal and Labyrinth, people were a bit confused. So yeah, that was unfortunate. But basically, that's the main reason I included a human character in Labyrinth, because Dark Crystal didn't have much of too good of a reception. So I tried to include a human character in the Labyrinth, but that didn't work out too well either, due to the fact that lack of well-known characters.
And this is for Andy Oakley, but maybe there's others who can answer it too. I'm wondering, sorry, I sent a direct question, but wondering, well, a little bit, how do you feel about gun control?
Well, I do believe that performing with guns is all right. However, violence against innocent people with them is not.
I love shooting people.
Don't do what I
Michelle. I have a question for Jim Henson. The Muppets and the characters were created. Created were just their personalities are so strong. Did you take any real life? Did you have anybody in mind from real life people that you drew your characters from?
Well, I've been dead for a while, so I don't quite remember everything, but I do remember that I had a friend named Kermit. Well, yeah, I had a friend named Kermit, so that's who Kermit's named after.
Andrew? Jim. Mr. Henson. So I was wondering, I understand that it was one of your friend's ideas to like have the target audience of the Muppets or the Sesame, one of those two. Yeah, be like inner city kids. But did you ever express any of your political beliefs in a children's show?
Well, I did showcase black people's coexistence with white people in one of the Muppet movies. I forget which one.
Does anyone have any questions for someone who has not been asked any?
Laura.
I don't think Mr. Reagan, or President Reagan, I don't think had a question. I think you mentioned something about, like, being slightly more liberal when you were younger. Did your political views change over the course of your life? And if so, how and why?
Oh yes, definitely. I was a Democrat during most of my youth. During my college years, I actually led a series of protests against the College Board because they kept cutting classes for financial reasons. I just went to college during the height of the Great Depression. Just over time, as I got into broadcasting and Hollywood, I slowly became more conservative with my beliefs. I couldn't tell you an exact moment. I think it was just me subsuming the culture over time.
Matt?
Mr. President, I'm sort of rumor that you are not a big fan of reading. It would be surprising for a president. Is there a truth to that?
I can't say I don't quite remember. I do know I wrote a great deal, as I mentioned, poetry and also some creative writing, but I was, yes, I read a fair amount.
Leo.
This is mostly for Cobain and Muddy Waters, but anyone else who likes to make or listen to music could answer, I suppose. But you've not been in this time for long, but if you've gotten a chance to hear any songs, do you think that it's progressed pretty well, or are you kind of disappointed with what we've managed to do?
I like my music better.
I like Metallica. And as I previously mentioned,
lectures I gave out loud, as well as in written novels, I just try to infuse a sense of comedy and emotion, because it's not just dry and bland teaching that. It actually has something to it that students can just grab onto, so to say. It makes it just more easily learnable and enjoyable.
Ms. Zach, how do you feel about the reversal of roles this week?
I would like to start off by saying I'm extremely disappointed. I believe the right to abortion should have been something that we added as an amendment to the Constitution, and it should have been a law. As from purely a legal standpoint, the case was weak at best. It was rooted in the right of privacy and instead of choice. It was a very weak case, Roe v. Wade was. But nevertheless, it still was precedent for many, many years. And the act of purely overruling it was something that I find very disappointing. What disappoints me even more is that my words were used as a way to justify this. I really dislike my words being taken out of context. It was something reason I wrote how I did.
Mr. Feynman, why did you try not to accept the Nobel Prize, and do you have any regrets about the impact of your drilling, how your drilling is used?
For your first question, I did try not to accept the Nobel Prize because when I was first told, I didn't want the attention, I didn't want fuss, and I had always hated formality. My father actually told me to look through the uniform, so to say, see that all royalty and such and politicians were just normal people with a fancy hat. I just didn't really want the attention. A reporter friend of mine, however, told me that it would cause a lot more fuss than it was worth to not accept it than to accept it, so I did. For your second question, I did certainly regret my work on the Manhattan Project, and it's somewhat unfortunate I did not think so at the time. Although my work in physics was also used for much greater things in the exploration of science, that particular use was not good.
Leah.
Also fun, but kind of a reversal in tone. You talked about getting in trouble with your employer before, but were there any times where you got really close to getting fired?
Fired, I'm not sure about, but arrested, yes.
I would hope they would be one and the same.
At Los Alamos, yes, I exploited some security concerns with the thing. There was literally a hole in the fence that I kept walking through, and for whatever reason, it really pissed the people off. And actually, they were thinking about arresting me, but realized I was just telling them to fix the hole. So they fixed the hole in the fence. They didn't arrest me, which was nice. But, yeah.
Andrew.
Richie, Mr. Feynman. So I understand that you did a regret the Manhattan Project, but how do you try to make up for it over the course of your life, other than your already groundbreaking discoveries in physics?
Make up for it. That is interesting. I did actually go to Japan, and I gave a lot of lectures there. It touched on the Manhattan Project and my work on it. And if I remember correctly, I believe I did kind of apologize for it, actually.
Jamie.
This is a question from Ms. Lord. What's your favorite poem?
I have to remember so bad. Forgive me. I'm so scattered.
You did write so many.
I know, I really did. Well, it's like picking a favorite child. As an artist, I refuse to pick a favorite, but I do have some that I especially like. I will recite for you now that I'm forever with a child, if that's okay. How the days went while you were blooming within me. I remember each upon each the swelling changes that planned of my body, and how you first fluttered and then jumped, and I thought it was my heart. How the wound down, and then turning of winter. I recall with you growing heavy. Against the wind, I thought, now her hands are formed and her hair has started to curl. Now she has teeth, and now she sneezes. Then the seed opened. I bore you one morning just before spring. My head rang like a fiery piston. My legs were towers between which a new world was passing. Since then, I can only distinguish one thread within running hours, you, flowing through shelves towards you.
Mr. Ray, many people say it was the beginning of a great polarization in this country. And I just wondered what you think of where things have ended up now. Like we see increased division between right and the left. What is your take on that?
I have to say I've been taking my afterlife as a sort of vacation of sorts. Very well.
Noah. Huh? Oh, yeah. Here's a question. Here's a question for Audrey. Do you have any, poets that you look up to or inspired by?
I mean, it's hard to pick one. There's so many. I'd say, oh man, this is so difficult. I'd say I really look up to, oh my God, I'm having to think. Emily Dickinson is one that I particularly really enjoy. I think that her character has been misrepresented a lot, but she was also a fellow enjoyer of women, which not a lot of people know about. But this is not about her. It's not about her. But yes, Emily Dickinson.
Sarah, what kind of dogs do you have, Lucy?
Oh, goodness! I had these little toy poodles, and they were so cute. I can't believe I forgot my own dog's name. I love them to death. I saw one earlier, I think Leslie's dog. His name is Archie. Looks a little bit like my dog's. Very sweet.
Sorry, I can't read your name tag. I don't have my glasses on, but. Oh.
It's a question greetings back along the lines of writing and scholarship. You think you do what would inspire me to her?
Before I died, I made a point of telling people and requesting that they waited to replace me. That the former president followed a tradition as had countless presidents before and waited until the transfer of power for my replacement. Instead, the process was rushed and I was replaced very quickly, even after a finished election. I disagree with my replacement on various issues, but I recognize that we are each, as judges, we need to disagree. That is part of what grows our point of view. But I do wish it had been dead weight for the transfer of power.
Julie? You have a question for Kurt Cobain? Did you have any interesting experiences during your concerts?
Not necessarily during one of my concerts, but I met my wife, Courtney Love, for the second time at an L7 concert, and that was a fun experience.
I'm so sorry.
Ellen?
There is a young man here who has been trying for a long time.
And Andrew. Ron. Mr. Reagan.
I didn't even call him Ron, and I knew him when we were both alive. Ron. I did call you Ron.
So, do you think that your previous experience as an actor in propaganda films had anything to do with your reason
We are going to be done with questions, by the way.
Okay, sorry for Mr. Waters. I don't think I've heard you answer any questions. So I'm wondering, what is your favorite song, and could you possibly sing a little bit of that song?
So I'll tell you my favorite song, and the best one is Got My Mojo Working. It wasn't
we would like to thank some people. We would first like to thank some people. We have some little presents for some people who especially helped out. I don't know where the list of people is, but there's a lot of them, and they're really great people. I would like to thank, of course, Kale. We cannot do this without Kale. Thank you so much, Shannon. Also, Michelle Smith, Matthew Frank, Carrie and Derek Franklin, Melissa Davis, Jacob White, and Laura Vienna. I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing your names wrong. Michelle Doyle, Carl Meadows, Jonathan Woodward. Thank you so much. I would like to briefly inform you about another school event that is coming up right around the corner. I'm so sorry that I'm breaking character, but for my junior project, Francis, I am hosting a dance benefit to raise money for Hillside. It will be super fun, and I hope to all see you there. It's on Friday, May 12th from 7 to 10, and I have flyers that I'll hand out to all of you. But let's all sing. And a raffle, and there's also a raffle. But